Hello, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. Great to have you with us this evening. We are going to be talking about the 50 Shades of Gray aliens. All right, and to do that, we have Ken Ammi with us. He's our special guest. He's been here before on a number of occasions, and you can go and check those out on the Awakening Report channel here on YouTube. Also, while you're here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, then hit the bell. And that way you get notified of other things that are coming up. So he just finished another book. This guy is prolific. He just cranks out the books, which is pretty cool. So his latest book, 50 Shades of Gray Aliens. And he's discussing what exactly are aliens in the context of the end times. What does the Bible say or not say? And I really appreciate his approach because when it comes to these kind of topics, you know, they're called kind of fringy or weird, strange sometimes, and indeed they are. But the big question is, well, what does the Bible say? What do the sources tell us about these topics? And so we're going to be taking your questions as well toward the end of the show. So make sure you have some. And if you want to ask questions, what I would ask is that you put a big Q next to your question. That way it's much easier for me to go through and see that you're actually asking me a question rather than just having a little comment, because I know how you guys get in there and you start talking to one another, and that's fine. But if you want to ask me a question, then please put the letter Q there. Without further ado, let's welcome Ken Ammi.
Oh, hey, well, hi. I found myself reading a book here.
It looks like a great book too, I have to say. So this is your latest book, 50 Shades of Gray Aliens. And what's up with that? Why write this book? What's the burning question that you just had to answer in writing this book?
Well, that's a good way of putting it, because there are a lot of burning questions with this issue, because it's actually a multifaceted issue, definitely. And there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to consider. The topic is fascinating. It's complex. It's frightening. It's, my goodness, is it ever just a deep, difficult issue? And in fact, there's a set of issues, and that's actually one of the main things I wanted to lay out at the outset. Mm-hmm. So if we could, the way I like to begin is generally by defining terms, understanding what we're talking about, and then getting into what we're discussing. So in this case, people generally refer to aliens and UFOs. Okay. Now by simply making that statement, we've already created a huge mess.
Okay.
Right? Because those are two categories which sometimes combine into a third. But the issue is, you could have people claiming to have seen a UFO and it has nothing to do with aliens. And you could have people claiming to have interacted with aliens and it has nothing to do with a UFO. So that's two main categories right there. But sometimes you have people who claim to see a UFO and then have an experience with aliens who pilot the UFO. So then you have a third category that combines the two. But under each of these three categories, then you have subcategories and subcategories and subcategories. So it's not as simple as aliens and UFOs. Okay, let's go and discuss the issue, because it's a lot of different topics.
Yeah, I think that's well put. UFO obviously being unidentified flying objects. And so really anybody can see a UFO if they don't know what it is, right? I mean, that's the broadest sense of the term. More typically, people are using that for some type of otherworldly type of craft. At least that's what people are often imagining. But the bottom line is you just don't know what the thing is. And so it's technically a UFO. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, little gray aliens are to follow. Okay, just because you saw something you cannot identify it doesn't mean that that you believe in these, or that you're endorsing in any sense that there are aliens or, you know, grays from other planets or something like that. So I think that's, again, very important. So go on. Where were you taking us with this this whole idea?
Well, see, you hit it on the head. You already noted two subcategories, which is one, the literal meaning is just something that appears to be flying and you don't know what it is. I myself had that kind of an experience a couple months ago. I could tell you about it, but I would ruin it ahead of time and tell you it was nothing exciting about it. It was just something in the sky, and me and the other people that were there couldn't figure out what it was. And that's about all I can describe it, but it was just something. I couldn't say either way exactly what it was. So that's literally a U with an F with an O. That's what it is. And the other category you hit upon is the claims that these are actually no longer quite unidentified. If you're claiming that it's an alien spacecraft, then you're claiming really to have identified it. Then that they could be weather phenomena, right, like ball lightning and various other things. And then you have a category of secret government vehicles. I mean, obviously we know about secret projects, and people start reporting seeing black triangular UFOs, and then it's revealed that our government was working on the stealth bomber, which looks like what? It looks like a black triangular airplane. Mm-hmm. So there you see subcategories under a category, and that's what I started out with. Is you can't even just say UFO. Now you have to get into all these details about what could it have possibly been. And this area of what I'm dealing here in aliens, UFOs, the connection or disconnection between them is actually one of the earliest things that actually caught my interest. When I was about in 6th grade, I really enjoyed reading about this kind of issue. I can't even claim that it's something I've kept up with ever since then, but in a way, nothing's really changed. You know, there are hoaxes, there are deceptions, there are lies, there are people who claim to have legitimate experiences, there are weather issues, and there are that small percentage that nobody can really explain. That's something that has always remained the same throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. And that's what that's the real classification of, well, I guess, when, again, unidentified, we don't know what it is, but then there is that very small percentage of times when these things cannot be explained by the things that you just cited. And of course, that's where, it gets interesting, and all kinds of speculation comes up, and people often jump to very fanciful conclusions. Again, it's not to say that that they're not real. I mean, both Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter both acknowledged that they had seen something that they could not explain, that they called a UFO. Jimmy Carter says, I've seen one, he used to laugh at people, and he says, I saw one. Ronald Reagan says he was in a plane, they were flying, and then they saw something, some UFO. And then he says, let's follow it. They did, and then it broke away from them. And, he's not endorsing little green men from Mars or something like that. He's just saying there was a craft. We didn't know what it was. And so, again, this is so important, people, that we need to define our terms. And a lot of times we get into debates, we get into big old feuds over things because we're just not listening. And listen, I'll be the first to admit I've made that mistake where I've assumed things about the other person, and I was the fool, as the book of Proverbs puts it. The fool answers before hearing the whole conversation. I've been that, and I've noted some other people have done that as well, where we're not listening. We're just ready to pounce and give our answer instead of truly listening. And as we painfully learn over our lifetimes, learning is a real skill, and it takes time. It takes effort to listen to the person without assuming that you know what they're going to say. I'd like to think I'm getting better, but I know that I have a long way to go. And
we have to learn how to learn.
Isn't that the case? And so this is one of these areas where, again, it doesn't mean that there's nothing supernatural happening. I believe there is. But it doesn't mean that every circumstance, every time there is some kind of an unidentified flying object, that it's going to be a spiritual thing. And I think the other thing, Ken, to really guard ourselves against is to always assume that everything is spiritual warfare. Because a lot of times it's a weather balloon or some kind of a naturally occurring phenomenon that we're just not familiar with. And if we would take time to familiarize ourselves, then we could weed out those things. And then when we do find something that really is legitimate and very strange, then we can have much greater confidence in the idea that maybe something really bizarre is going on if we're not always freaking out over the littlest things.
Right, and that is part of another subcategory, right? The main category next to UFOs being aliens. And again, just what are we talking about? Well, here you go with the subcategory of claims that we actually are dealing with legitimate aliens who at first would tell us that they come from other planets in our solar system. But then as we began to explore our solar system and didn't find any life, then they decided, well, we really come from outside your solar system. And as these things became less likely, well, we really come from the other side of the universe, or what's most popular nowadays, we actually come from another dimension. So basically, don't even bother looking for us in the universe because we're somewhere outside of it, which really makes things more convenient. But it is interesting how they appear to claim to their claims to their own existence seems to move further and further away from us the more that we become aware of our surroundings. And so another subcategory to the aliens issue is certainly demons. Whitley Strieber, one of the poster boys for... Actually, let me take a step back there. Okay, so Whitley Strieber is most certainly the poster boy for experiences with aliens and has been for decades and decades and decades, right? But he actually has never claimed that he's in touch with aliens. He calls them visitors. Mm. And he has certainly, through the years, tried on very many theories as to try to explain his experiences. But certainly one of his earlier attempts was in 1988. He wrote a book called Transformations, and he wrote, "I felt an absolutely indescribable sense of menace. It was hell on earth to be there, and yet I couldn't move, I couldn't cry out, couldn't get away. Whatever was, there seemed to be so monstrously ugly, so filthy and dark and sinister. Of course they were demons. They had to be. And they were here, and I couldn't get away."
Wow.
So that is certainly a subcategory, is that it is demonic activity. Another subcategory to the issue of whether they're aliens is things like the MK Ultra mind control experiments that were run by the CIA. And in this case, I would again turn to Whitley Strieber, because as I would listen to some of his talks, every now and then he would happen to mention he has military ties and he has people he knows in the CIA. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just keep that in the file in the back of my head for future reference. Mm-hmm. And then one day he put out an entire video where he says, "I have come to recognize that I was a victim of MK Ultra mind control experiments." Wow. Now, let me pause a second. I don't know if he was or he wasn't. I'm just saying that's what he claimed. Okay. Mm-hmm. And now there's a video you can find in YouTube. I mean, I have it on my own channel. You could probably find it under "Interview with an Alien." Okay. And it's supposedly one of these secret military bases that was keeping an alien, and they got footage of it. And wouldn't you know it, unfortunately, the alien dies right there on camera. So that's the end of that. Okay.
It's convenient.
Now, to me, looking, yeah, it is. But to me, looking at it, it's an obvious puppet. Okay, I mean, it's obvious. Anyone who watched the Muppet Show when they were kids,
it's not
obviously,
bad.
It's a puppet. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, it's not fuzzy like those Muppets, but obviously it's a puppet. And the thing is, for the documentary where that appeared, they said they contacted Whitley Strieber to ask him to comment, and that he was so shaken up he would not appear on camera, but that he told them that if that is not a real visitor, then whoever made that puppet knows how they move. Okay, so I'm thinking, well, okay, wait a minute. To me, the way it moves is obviously being puppeteered. So what does that tell me about Whitley Strieber then coming out and claiming that he has been a victim of mind control experimentation? It tells me that they would get him into some kind of state of hypersuggestibility, some kind of hypnosis, something like that. And they would trot out these puppets and have him interact with them. And he would leave thinking, hey, I just had these paranormal experiences with beings from another dimension. That's what it tells me anyway. So that's another subcategory to the alien issue. And in fact,
so just to clarify,
yes.
Understanding that he was absolutely, 200% convinced that he had a real encounter with an alien. Nothing could shake him from that. And then evidence was proposed to him that, in fact, he had been exposed to some kind of a puppet. He's like, okay, so well then, but that has to be the real thing because my experience was so real. Whatever we see here must be a really good enactment of what they are doing. But in your mind, you're saying, well, that now brings his credibility as a witness down, way down, down low, versus where at first maybe he seemed like a pretty credible witness, but now he seemed like a very incredible or incredulous kind of witness. Is that the idea?
You have hit it on the head again, and he actually
three for three. Yay! All right.
He actually speaks on that issue himself, because admitting that he went through those experiences and admitting that when he was a child he underwent Skinner therapy, like Skinner box treatment, is literally where you stick a child inside of a box and you close it. It's basically a low-level form of sensory deprivation. So obviously he's had a lot of, I feel super bad for the guy. He's obviously been abused in various ways throughout his life. But he says, well, okay, knowing and admitting that I've been through these mind control experiments, why does he then still insist that he has experiences with the visitors? Now, my skeptical and cynical side want to say, well, because if not, you would basically topple the whole career you've been building for yourself for decades. But that would kind of go more towards perhaps his motivation, and I don't really want to go there. So what he says is, I still know that I've had experiences with genuine visitors, because on the day I had those experiences, people who would run into me later would point out that I seemed agitated. Okay, so he interprets that to be, well, I had real experiences with these visitors, so I was shaken and I was agitated, where I would say, well, if you were undergoing mind control experimentation, that would be sufficient for you to end up being agitated on that day. You know what I mean? I'm taking kind of a Occam's razor style approach.
Sure.
So that's his explanation, and I'm not sure it flies very well. So
it's challenging. Well, what do you do with data like John Mack from Harvard, and you got David Jacobs? These are two prominent alien researchers, and they've done numerous hypnotic regressions, and the common thread through all of these hypnotic regressions is these people have had some kind of experience where they're taken, they're inspected. Sometimes their different body cavities are inspected for whatever that means. Many of the women feel like they have been impregnated with some other kind of being. They're pregnant for a while, and then that baby inside of them is taken out. They're harvested. Men feel like their sperm is harvested. So here you have two men who, at least at first glance, appear to be quite credible. And there's, of course, also Dr. Jacques Vallée. So these are the guys that would seem to give a real credible side to some kind of abduction experience. Certainly the people believed it. And then these guys, just being clinicians, were incredibly skeptical of anything except, some kind of a weird psychotic event going on. And after they kept interviewing person after person after person, they had to come to the conclusion, well, I think something's actually going on beyond just a mental delusion. Right.
And see, we're actually not even done speaking of the subcategories, and this is one of them.
Okay.
This is one of them. So under the subcategory of government experimentations, there's also, I'm going to point out a book by Martin Cannon, and it's called The Controllers, 1996 book. And he basically explains that just with the high tech, even of that day, 1996, you could very well put somebody through the alien contact and abductee style of experience. Project Bluebeam comes to mind. I could probably explain what that is if I need to. Voice to skull technology, where you would hear something and the person next to you wouldn't, because it's not based on sound waves. It's waves that are being directed to your skull, so they're literally resonating within you. You hear it, the next person doesn't, and then you're talking about all kinds of technology that could be implanted in your body. So that was even back then, and I would absolutely love somebody to update that book. So then let's go back to Strieber as the example of what you were talking about. He explains these as experiences with multidimensional beings, where the evidence points to the fact that he was dealing with some kind of black ops, some kind of government operation, to give him the impression that is what he was going through. So for all we know, these poor people are being abducted by government forces who are doing who knows what for who knows what reason. But that is definitely one of the main things we should consider, is we know that this is possible with even the technology they had back in the 90s, much less today.
What's crazy is that both of these scenarios are quite frightening. I'm not sure which is worse,
right.
To be taken by some other spiritual being or just basic humans and doing these very, very weird, dark projects,
Right. And because then we have another category, which is a combination of the two. These human beings dealing with dark beings and carrying out their will and doing these things so that there's, like I said, this is just such a hugely complex issue. That's why I kind of shudder when people dive right into talking about aliens and UFOs, that there's so much to think about before even attempting to guess what's going on in any particular scenario. I'll give you another example of categories, and that's the people who are reporting that these things are happening to them. That's a category in its own. And there you have subcategories such as abductees, contactees, experiencers, and one of my favorite, channelers. Okay, now I find alien channeler to be incredibly convenient, because then you don't even need aliens or UFOs to be around. And for me, it's very telling that why is it that a person who channels aliens has the same shtick as the person who claims to be channeling the spirits of the dead? I mean, how come they're doing the same exact things?
Right. And it sounds just like the people that used to channel, demons and whatnot in the Bible back in the day, So it sounds like the same shtick, exactly.
Yeah, the Ob. I know you know the Hebrew, the Ob. Like the Ob of Endor,
Yeah, the witch there, yeah, exactly.
Then, of course, along with this comes the issue of the close encounters, and you have different categories, right? First kind, second kind, third kind. And then one other category we touched upon is the occult, which is how come these super advanced beings are basically coming down here and putting us through all kinds of trauma, physical and mental and emotional and spiritual. And so we end up with a lot of things to consider. And this is why I know that we researchers and people who rely upon our research would like us to have silver bullets for everything. But I'm afraid there's a lot more werewolves around than there are silver bullets. So in this case, is there a UFO alien theory of everything? Not only do I not think there is, I don't see how there possibly could be, because these categories are all over the place. You can't put the activity of demonic beings in the same category as governments flying secret airplanes. I mean, it's completely different. See what I mean?
Do you think that, you know, all of these things, such as government technology, black technology, and what's happening with the occult, and of course, you know, the real, what shall we call them, the real episodes that people have with some kind of a spiritual being, do you think maybe these are all under kind of a big category for Satan, that, you know, his bigger goal is to deceive humanity in some way, and he's happy to do that, whether it's through government technology or it's through its some type of actual encounter with a spiritual entity?
So who are you asking me about? The prince of the power of the air?
I'm asking about, you know, I'm asking you to speculate on, you know? I'm asking you to speculate on Satan's motives here.
Yeah, but I'm saying I'm starting there because that gives you a hint right there, doesn't it?
Yes.
And don't ask me to explain it, but there were cultures, and even maybe in the early church, off the top of my head, who believed that demons inhabited literally the air. I'm not sure how they got that or what.
Well,
but
I could tell you that goes all the way back to Enlil. He was the chief god of Sumer, and Enlil literally means Lord of the Air.
Right.
And he's also known as the god of the earth, and he is the one who separated heaven and earth. Anu, the creator god, took heaven as his portion, and Enlil took earth as his portion. And so, and then if you trace that word, Enlil becomes Elil in the Akkadian myth, and then it finds its way into the book of Isaiah as Halel, which is probably incorrectly translated as Lucifer. But the actual Hebrew there is Halel, and I would say that there's a 100% chance here that it's actually coming from Enlil to Elil to Halel, and once you trace that and you see that this god Enlil was actually the god of 33 stars, he was the god of the air, he was also known as the great dragon, he was known as the great mountain. I mean, so many epithets that are applied to the Satan that we talk about are also applied to this ancient god. So I have actually no doubt that they are one and the same entity.
In fact, let me read you a quote which I think touches upon the issue of dealing with otherworldly beings or other dimensional beings or other spiritual beings and this affinity for people to actually want contact with them or somehow opening themselves to contact with them. In fact, you could see videos of people literally talking to the sky and asking the aliens to appear. So this is a quote from Barbara Marciniak. And she says, I followed an enticing impulse and went on a sacred journey tour to Egypt and Greece. And she went to Delphi also. Okay. I sat down on the floor with my back up against the bed, recalled my visit to the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and said out loud, I intend to be a clear channel now. After a few minutes, I began to speak in a voice other than my own, and the source soon identified themselves as the Pleiadians. Now, let me take a step back and then jump back into this. Because one oddity I've found is people say, oh, high tech, that seems beyond anything we know, therefore aliens. That's quite a leap because all of us know that there are secret government experiments and craft and all that. Okay, but that's a leap people make. And the further leap that's even wilder in my mind is high tech, therefore aliens, therefore high spirituality. I mean, what is the connection between high tech and high spirituality? So, for instance, if our astronauts went to a populated alien planet, would that automatically make them representatives of the high spirituality on Earth? In fact, interestingly enough, that's something that came up in Carl Sagan's Contact, is they had that kind of discussion. So why think that because these aliens have high tech, therefore they can tell us all about God, or not God, or some sort of pantheism, or whatever they want to tell us on any given day? And that's something I would like to talk about in a moment, is the alien messages. But to me, those are non sequiturs. High tech, therefore aliens. Aliens with high tech, therefore high spirituality. So interestingly enough, Barbara Marciniak has claimed for decades now to be in contact with Pleiadians, and she's certainly not the only one. Whereas Billy Meier, another person who claims to have been in contact with aliens since back in the 70s, he claims that anyone claiming to be in contact with Pleiadians is automatically identified as a fraud. Because this guy changes his story probably as often as he changes his socks, you know. So originally he claimed to be in touch with Pleiadians himself, but then I guess other people started jumping on the bandwagon, and he said, actually, my alien contacts told me they don't come from the Pleiades, they come from somewhere called the Plajaran. They're Plajarans. So anyhow, that's the way he... That's just the way he sort of seeks to, I guess, build his own little group. And Billy Meier actually began having contact with aliens, so he claims, when he was living in India in an ashram. So there's an interesting occult connection in my mind. Whitley Strieber as well, actually. He said he first started having experiences with visitors in his meditation room. So you just cannot get away from this occult aspect of this phenomena. And, you know, we often function according to the dictum that we would know them by their fruits, right? So if you boil down what aliens are telling us, and my goodness, people have been claiming for decades to get all sorts of messages from aliens. And when you cut through the fluff and puff, and my goodness, is there a ton of fluff and puff, because this is generally expressed in New Age terms, and you know, New Age terminology is very fluffy and puffy. But I've come to realize that they're telling us three main things, and the point I want to make is about misinformation, which is a lie wrapped around truth, so it seems believable, right? So the three claims they make are true, but their solution is problematic. So they'll claim, well, you humans are always warring, government against government, right? Nation against nation. Okay, yeah, definitely go with you on that. And you guys are polluting the earth. Okay, no problem. Go with you there. And you guys are always battling each other over religion. Again, okay, I'm with you so far. All 3 points. So what's their solution? Build a one world government with a one world religion and worship the earth as an entity, you know, as your God, basically Gaia or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute. I've heard that somewhere before, that sort of concept of a one world government, one world religion. I think I read it in the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
So why are aliens coming from across the universe or another dimension to set us straight? You know, this little rock spinning around an average star in the backwater of the universe, and they care about our politics and our religion. I mean, and why are they deciding that our solution is the same solution as Satan unfurls in the Revelation? Huh.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Gee, if I connect the dots, what do I get here? Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that was very telling. Another interesting aspect of this related is Sean Stone. I don't know if you recognize that name. He's the son of the famous director Oliver Stone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't really know what he's into. Okay, at some point he was asked why he converted to Islam, and he said he'd never converted to Islam, but that he accepted Islam. Okay, look, I don't know. Whatever he's into. Well, anyhow, he was on Jesse Ventura's show, Conspiracy Theory, and they did an episode about Skinwalker Ranch, which is AKA Sherman Ranch, owned by Robert Bigelow. And so this whole show was about alien and UFO experiences at Skinwalker Ranch. Okay, now on the way to the ranch, they claimed that aliens were contacting them through the car radio. And at least according to the subtitles on the show, the aliens were saying, "True evil, evil, so evil." Okay, again, I'm not sure why aliens would want to come and tell us that, but, you know, whatever. Even more telling, though, is, so they're out there at night, and Sean Stone is standing there with his eyes closed, and someone says, "Hold on a second, you all right, Sean?" And he says, "What do you got, Sean? What are you doing?" And this is what he says: "Inviting the spirits to come out."
Wow. Well, all right. Well, at least he's honest about it, right? Thank you.
So first, I thought we were talking about aliens, but he's inviting spirits to come out. And he's inviting spirits to come out. I mean, in other words, he's opening himself up to have some kind of experience with whatever being might be out there who's just waiting for that door to open, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, interestingly enough, the narration states that Sean's ritual paid off. And then you see a red dot in the sky that's, I guess, supposed to be some kind of UFO, you know. So that was extremely telling to me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the common thread we're getting here is that when people do experience something, it has nothing to do with real nuts and bolts technology. At least not when we're talking about aliens, right? It's not about real nuts and bolts technology. We're actually spirits, and they very frequently just quite admit that. I'll be a channeler. I mean, a channel is the same terminology that, again, a spiritist would use. This guy, Sean, is doing the same thing, calling forth the spirits. Let's just be honest here. What you're doing is you're going right back to the age-old necromancy and mediums and spiritists and all the things that God said, don't do this because it ends very badly when you do that. And, now it's just in a different garb. It's, a little bit different language on the surface. But then when you get a little deeper, they just go back to the same language. And I find it quite amusing that, the ancient god Astarte is now just Ashtar, Galactic Commander, Federation Galactic Commander or something, and it's like, really, you couldn't even think of a different name besides, Ashtar. I mean, that's the same guy, same demon, but now he's just got a new look, right? It's like when you go to the supermarket and it says same great product, new look.
And that's very common. You will find that a lot of supposed aliens have these names. For example, Billy Myers, one of his main contacts is Sanyaza.
Whoa! Yeah, gee, where we heard him before, Book of Enoch, and
one of the main fallen angels in the Book of Enoch. And so that is a very common theme, that these aliens somehow end up with names from false gods past or demons past or who knows what from the past, the history of the occult. But another aspect of this that you were touching upon is one of the reasons I call the book 50 Shades of Grey Aliens. I recognize that people have claimed to have seen all kinds of different aliens. I think the most convenient ones are the ones that look exactly like human beings. That's always cool.
No, they're easy. You don't have to do any special drawings.
But the issue of the Greys is interesting because they are really the poster boys nowadays. Very well known, especially well known from Whitley Strieber, who again would not claim that they're aliens, but that they're visitors. But whatever. And part of it is how these things are handled through our pop culture. Okay, because in a way, it's not good enough to dismiss pop culture in terms of fantasy literature and fiction and comic books and movies as just being entertainment, because they all proceed from somebody's real life worldview, whether they're purposefully trying to tell fantastic tales or not. It is a fact that there are people writing scripts and editing them and discussing them and approving them, and they are philosophizing in a way. So that was part of what I started thinking about is, well, how did this so very popular form of supposed alien come to be, right? Large head, large eyes, small nose, small mouth, no ears, basically. And I ran into the claims by 4 different people who are in 3 or 4 different realms of interest, meaning that they come from at least 3 different contexts, who claimed these aliens are actually human beings visiting us from the future, and that is what we end up looking like.
No, okay, and
yeah.
Wow, disfigured and out of shape.
But I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. That is apparently a very popular concept nowadays. So I thought, well, let's see if I can trace back through sci-fi and see how these ideas have been handled. And I actually have about 100 pages of my book that are covers of comic books and fantasy literature showing these gray alien basic forms. And I found when I started my research, I actually finished the second I started, because I went back to H.E. Wells, and he wrote an essay called The Man of the Year Million. And guess what this Man of the Year Million looks like? Well, it's got a shriveled up, skinny little body. And it's got a big head with big eyes and small mouth and small nose. Because the concept to him was, well, in the future, we won't need to be doing very much physical labor, right? Because our technology would be doing that so much for us. We wouldn't need our bodies very much anymore. We wouldn't need big mouths, because we would get our nutrition from basically sitting in tubs full of nutrients, liquid nutrients. And our brains would evolve, along which comes the elongated skull, along with which comes the elongated eyes. So there you have the scenario right there. From the outset, this form was conceived to be the future of human beings. Okay, and then as I go through the fantasy literature, all of a sudden you start getting hints of, well, wait a minute, these aren't actually travelers from the future, these are actually aliens. So somewhere along the way, this concept, which was pretty common, which is this is what human beings look like in the future, all of a sudden it starts getting shifted to, they're actually aliens. So I found that really fascinating, not to mention, of course, or mentioning the famous drawing by Aleister Crowley.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
From his, demonic contact, which looks very much like your typical gray alien. And although this drawing has very small eyes, if you look right above its tiny little eyes, there is the imprint of much larger eyes, and there's a ritual that the OTO does related to that I don't really want to talk about. But so there's 100 pages showing you kind of this transformation, this evolution from the recognizing that this is what the great things in the past were thinking about when they thought about human evolution, and then being taken over by sci-fi writers, and then it being transformed into, well, guess what? They're actually aliens. They're not human beings from the future. And so we see...
But Aleister Crowley was not suggesting that was a human from the future. He was suggesting that was, in fact, a demon.
Right. Right. So that's part of it, too. That's part of it as well. Exactly.
And he predates H.E. Wells, doesn't he? I mean, he's like 1920s, 1910s. I forget exactly the dates.
He does not predate H.G. Wells. I'm flipping to the page right now as we speak, live on the air with Douglas Hamp. So Crowley published this drawing in 1919.
Okay.
Okay, and Wells was Man of the Year Million was 1893.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's good to know.
So here, let me see if I can show one more. Right, that's a very typical sort of alien, gray alien look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's from Starfire, the official publication of the Typhonian OTO, the Order Templis Orientis, you know, one of the main occult groups around that Crowley was definitely involved with. So they're still kind of touching upon this.
Well, let me ask you something. How do you think Darwinian evolution plays into this bigger topic? If we had not had Darwinian evolution with its slow, gradual changes, and that, you know, from the goo to the zoo to you idea, could people have made a convincing argument that you know, that we're going to evolve to be something else, or that there are aliens? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it definitely goes right back to an alternate cosmology and an alternate anthropology. Absolutely. Now, I want to be very clear in saying that biology is a science, but evolution is a worldview philosophy. So it's a template through which to interpret biology. And since it's interpretive, it's necessarily biased by the observer. And so it definitely becomes a worldview. And I find that when I get into discussion, especially with atheists, they take my observations on evolution very, very personally. And one day I thought, well, why are they getting so emotional about a theory that is supposed to be about biology? I mean, nobody gets like that if I'm talking about cosmology or gravity or chemistry or anything else. And then I realized, well, it's because they have turned it into a worldview, which it was never supposed to be. And so that is definitely part of what, in a lot of people's minds, evolution equals freedom, right? So maybe it's the transhumanist freedom to forego natural selection and to become ourselves the selectors, so that we're now shaping and molding humanity made in our own image. Or the this claim that, well, you know, if life is just an accident, then it could have accidented anywhere else in the universe, or, you know, like I said, nowadays maybe another dimension. And then you're pretty much done there. You can't put the brakes on anything because, well, if anything could happen anywhere by accident, then anything did happen anywhere by accident. And so there we are. So yeah, human beings could eventually just turn into these gray-like creatures. Mm-hmm. Actually, before I forget, let me mention one thing about that.
Yeah.
As we're talking about these grays, and as we're talking about entertainment and fiction and Hollywood now, so there's a movie made about Travis Walton called Fire in the Sky. Okay, and at one point they depict him aboard a spacecraft, and he sees this typical gray alien looking thing, but he goes up to it, touches it, and realizes it's just their, like an astronaut's suit for them.
Okay, right.
That's not what they actually look like. It's just a face mask. And in the movie, the aliens look like kind of meaner, nastier version of E.T. You know, but right. Walton actually claims to have seen two different kinds of aliens. Ones were somewhat like grays, and the others were very much like humans. You know, you couldn't distinguish in them from human beings, which again I think is very convenient. And then in the movie made about Whitley Strieber, which is called Convenient, they have a scene also where he grabs one of the gray aliens and he pulls off the bottom part of its face, and it turns out, again, it's a mask. and underneath, there was some kind of, I don't know, weird squishy reptilian-like mouth thing, basically. And he says, but this isn't it either. You're right. This is like a Chinese doll thing. There's just layers upon layers upon layers to this mystery. The thing is, I contacted Travis Walton and Whitley Strieber, and I asked them, was that part of your actual experience, or is that like Hollywood movie magic? And they both said it's just Hollywood. Mm. That was actually not an experience. And I thought, well, that's too bad, because that would have been really cool, just as a piece of the puzzle. But yeah, so you can forget all that. That's just something somebody made up along the way. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm glad I asked, because to me that was really interesting that in these two very well-known stories, you do happen to have this same exact theme, but that was just movie stuff.
Interesting. So. Yeah. Hey, we do have some questions. Yes. One person, Lauren, she asks, why would a demon abduct a human? They should already know our DNA and how our bodies work. So I think this is kind of a somewhat rhetorical question, but any thoughts on that? Because it is a good question.
Well, I don't know. Is there such a thing as a rhetorical answer?
Well, maybe just comments. I think that's what we call those.
Well, again, let's remember all the crazy number of categories we have. So is it strictly and only and exclusively demons abducting humans? No, we don't know that. That's the point. That's what makes it so incredibly frustrating and difficult. Why would people involved in government abduct humans? That would definitely make more sense, even though they would understand how our bodies function as well as demons would if they are abducting us, and as well as aliens would. By now, you'd think if they can manage to travel across the universe or dimensions, they've looked at enough human bodies and they've cut up enough cows that they wouldn't have to be doing this anymore. So why on earth is anybody under any category still doing the same kind of thing? And to me, the way I view this, the way I view MK Ultra, the way I view a lot of these things, is it all comes down to mystical alchemy. Okay, so the basic point is to put a human being through enough trauma that their personality basically suffers a crack, a breakdown, and then in the midst of that rubble you've caused, when you've reduced a person who is now so badly damaged physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, then you're able to rebuild them in your own image. So a government would do this to turn you into some kind of Manchurian candidate assassin. Aliens would do this in order to then have as many people who claim contact with aliens inevitably end up with this Messiah complex. Okay? Yeah. Demons would want to do that, obviously, to get you to understand that Jesus is not God and salvation is not only through him. And we get a ton of that. I mean, alien messages are 99% anti-Christian and 1% anti, something else. In fact, Billy Meier, again, is a great example of that. He claims he traveled back in time and he had a conversation with Jesus, who set him straight about a bunch of stuff. He claims his name was not Jesus. For some reason, he takes the name Emmanuel and gets rid of the first E and replaces a J. So his real name was Jemanuel, whatever. And so Billy Meier ends up writing a book called The Talmud of Jemanuel, which he claimed is, well, he doesn't claim he wrote it. He claims he found the ancient manuscripts about which nobody in the entire world knew for 2 millennia, but he found them, and then he translated them into German. But by golly, then the original manuscript was destroyed. So all we have is what Billy Meier wrote down.
Convenient.
And what did he write down? Well,
Joseph Smith. Yeah.
So but I don't want to veer too far away from the question. The answer was, it depends what category we're talking about, and there are reasons why any of these entities, whether human or spiritual or alien, would still want to be doing that kind of stuff. And it has nothing to do with them learning even more about the human body. It's about changing us. It's about impacting our culture and our world and our spirituality.
Yeah. Here's what Dr. David Jacobs says in his book, The Threat. And again, I'm not saying that he's right, but this is his conclusion. He says the program ultimately is not abducting people. Abductions, you have to remember, are means to an end. They're abducting people for a purpose, for a reason. The physical act of abducting people, which is the abduction phenomenon, really is only part of the program. So what we have here is an abduction program, a breeding program, which accounts for all the reproductive activity that we see, and a hybridization program, which is why people see hybrids all the time as babies, as toddlers, as adolescents, and then as adults. And John Mack from Harvard comes to a very similar conclusion. Now, what I find very interesting about these two gentlemen is that, you know, they're not Christian, so they're not looking for the end of the world per se. They don't claim to be part of any occult or anything. They're just, according to their own testimony, they are just clinicians. They're just trying to understand the world around them, and all these cases of people that claim to have been abducted, they're trying to understand what's going on. And David Jacobs says that when he first started the research, he was quite upbeat about it. He thought we're kind of on the cusp of a new age. And then after 30 some years, he's gotten to the place where he despairs of this, because now he feels like he has uncovered this this secret plot, and it's not a good one. And the basic idea is that the aliens, so-called, exist in a type of immaterial form, and they need to mate with us in order to take on some kind of a physical form. So if in fact we are having abductions, okay, and that's a big if, and you know who's doing it, but if we come to the conclusion that it is actually some type of spiritual entity, why would they do this? According to Jacobs, it's because they are trying to create a hybrid race. And you know, I found that very interesting in my book, Corrupting the Image. There I lay out the case that the mark of the beast is going to literally be a genetic combination between human and demon. So, you know, again, lots of possibilities. And part of your 50 Shades of Gray aliens, you know, again, it depends how we categorize, subcategorize, and who exactly we're talking about. But once we get right down to this level, there does seem to be at least a case that you can make for some kind of a hybridization program. But again, some of these people, probably most of them are quacks, and some of them, you know, might be in fact telling the truth. So it's just hard to know exactly what's happening all the time.
Exactly, and that's what makes this issue so frustrating. Is, like I said, I don't even see how it's possible to have one theory of everything, which makes it really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Now, while you were talking, I had a
Well, there's a few more comments and questions, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wish we could literally read every comment and deal with them, because there's some people making some very interesting observations and also asking some good questions. So if I could.
Please, go ahead.
One of them is how do you think the end times alien disclosure deception will play out? And part of my thinking on that is, generally when we think of disclosure, we think of the government or the governments of the world finally revealing exactly everything that they know about this issue. And unfortunately, that would mean that we would have to believe people who we have known for decades are deceptive. I mean, would it be the ultimate disclosure, or would it be the ultimate deception? Right? I mean, how could we rely on our governments to tell us the truth if they know more about this issue than we do? So if there is some kind of end times component to this, I would see it as the governments finally disclosing that, guess what? Yep, these aliens represent high spirituality, and we need a one world government, we need a one world religion, and here's this Christ savior alien guy. You know, that I could see happening. Trusting the government to actually disclose the truth to us, that I don't really see happening.
I think you make a good point there. You make a very good point. Yeah, great point. Well, you're looking at the questions as well. Are there any others that you want to take a look like? Because I see one, Aceman 1126. He says, is there any correlation to the modern look of aliens and the historical elongating of children's heads in South American culture? I think that's what some of the actual fallen angels look like. And I know that L.A. Marzulli is, that's one of his theses, is that the people with the big heads in Peru are some form of Nephilim. And it wasn't just that they were, purposefully deforming their heads, but these people came out this way with deformed heads. And he believes that is actual physical DNA proof of Nephilim.
Or otherwise, it could be interesting that if there are demonic entities who prefer to manifest themselves in this look for whatever reason, I could see people wanting to emulate that, right? People generally want to emulate, like if a pop star starts wearing a certain brand of cool sneakers, right? Every kid has to go out and buy them. So maybe back in the day it was, oh, look, these super advanced entities look like this. We should make ourselves look in their image. So again, that it's so easy to speculate, and it's so difficult to pin anything down. Like here's one. Can the Greys actually be made by more powerful entities to fly the ships in our dimension? Sure, why not? You know what I mean? It's I'm not saying it, I'm not saying it's a dumb question. I'm saying that where do we draw the line? How could I say yes or no to that? I mean, it's so like I said, it's so confusing because this really combination of topics is so incredibly broad, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess in that question, I would have to say that we're presupposing that there are actual alien inhabitants of the universe. But then again, the question doesn't state that. So then can I take it in any direction that I want? You know what I mean? It makes it so difficult, so frustrating.
Yeah. James has asked he asked a good question. Have the UFO craft witnessed over the decades advanced by leaps and bounds to match our expectations, or not so much?
I would say that they have, because the earliest ones you have in the late 1800s are basically hot air balloons. I mean, that's pretty much what they look like. And then you had the channelers, like I said, claiming that they were flying around in things that looked very much like airplanes, because that's what we were used to looking at. And then you had really the media kind of taking over by coining the term flying saucer. So all of a sudden, people better start reporting that they're witnessing a saucer-shaped craft, or else they don't fit the narrative. You know what I mean? It's such a weird psychology behind this whole thing.
Interesting. Well, it will be interesting how this all plays out. I think that at the bottom of all this, we can definitely say that there is a deception going on. There seems to be no question about that. Exactly what is the end game of this deception? Well, if we look at the Bible, the end game seems to be to deceive mankind, to get him to a place where he's not looking to the God of heaven, but he's looking to some other type of entity. And of course, as Ken has so well pointed out, much of these messages are completely in step with spiritual channelers, with people that are necromancers, spiritists, and this, of course, goes way back. So really the message hasn't changed that much. The dressing on it, the costume has changed a bit. Some of the technology surrounding this has changed a bit. But when you get right down to the core, it's a spiritual deception meant to divert man from following the one true God. And you know, that really, I think we're in agreement that that's kind of the bottom line. You know, if after we cut through all of this different stuff, you know, whether Satan is using the government or he's doing it through, you know, some kind of demons that happen to manifest or something, at the end of it all, it's to get us and our eyes off of the one true God. So where can they get your book, Ken?
If you go to my website, truefreethinker.com, all one word, I made it very user-friendly. You can find everything, all my social networking stuff, and a link to how to get my books on Amazon, or just get them for me, because buying from the author is always better for the author, by the way.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, it is. And yeah, what's his name? Jeff Bezos has enough money already. So good point. So everyone, check out the book. Go ahead and get it if this is a topic that you need more information on. Ken, we thank you for coming on the show and for giving us an expose of this labyrinth topic. It's a lot of fun stuff, but we always have to be careful to look for real sources, and that's one reason I love having you on the show, is because you know, you're not going to go with, you know, this side or that side. Just what do the sources say? And I think when it comes to really any topic, whether it's the Bible or it's history or it's science, what is the source for what you're saying? And too often, and you know, this happens in areas of science and many other areas, where we latch on to something as one little piece of evidence, but it's very small, it's very weak, and then it grows into this whole thing. And then we kind of follow that rabbit trail for a while, and then it dies off, and then we're on to the next thing. So we have to stick with the hard evidence. And when it comes to the Bible, what is the hard evidence? The Bible, okay? And you know, there's places where we're going to speculate and say, you know, I don't really know, but maybe. But those should be pretty infrequent. We really want to spend the bulk of our time, the majority of our time, looking at clear verses. And I can just tell you that that will get you out of trouble and keep you out of trouble if you will look at what the Bible does say versus what it doesn't say, and trying to always fill in the blanks, because that's a risky business. So does the Bible talk about end times deception? Yes. Could it involve some kind of alien UFO thing? Maybe, right? But that's about as far as we can go. So again, thanks again, Ken. Everyone check out his website. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Again, stay in the Word. That's all I can tell you. Just stay in the Word. God has the answers. We're so grateful. Till next time, God bless.